Okay, we're going to look at the study guide for the final exam. So what was the cause of the Whiskey Rebellion? The Whiskey Rebellion, remember, is by Pennsylvania farmers. They're corn farmers and they're upset because an excise tax has been placed on the production, the sale, the distribution of whiskey. And so what ends up happening is they decide that they don't want to pay the tax and they start crying out no taxation without representation. George Washington says you will pay the tax because you do have representatives, you have the Congress, and you voted in your representatives, and your representatives approved of Hamilton's economic plan. So the cause of the Whiskey Rebellion is the excise tax that was placed on whiskey due to Hamilton's economic plan. And remember, Hamilton's economic plan, he's the first Secretary of Treasury under George Washington, our first president, and he decides he wants to stabilize the United States economy by creating this plan that taxes and puts tariffs on items. He would also like to create a national bank. And the other thing that he wants to go ahead and do is assume all the state's debts. So the second question that we're going to answer is going to be what was the XYZ affair and what sentiment did it actually contribute to. So when you look at what the XYZ affair is, when the French and the British don't like the United States right after the American Revolutionary War, and they're actually in the middle of a fight themselves. They're in the middle of a war, and they want us to take a side. And so both of them are harassing us on the open sea. That means the Atlantic Ocean. And harassment means they're taking our ships, they're boarding them, stealing all our supplies. So we're a little upset about this. So second President John Adams sends our diplomats, ambassadors, to France to speak to the French government about not doing this anymore. You know, give us a break. We're not going to choose any sides. We're declaring we're neutral. Well, when our guys get over there, three French men come up and they say, if you want to speak to the French government, you have to pay money in order to speak to the French government. Well, we don't pay to speak to any government. That's not how it works here in the United States. So the American diplomats, they come back here to the United States and they're like, these French people want us to pay to speak to their government and just speak to them about ending the harassment. So everyone in the United States gets really, really upset. Americans start to call for war. But President John Adams, who is a Federalist, decides to calm it down and we don't go to war with France. But what is the sentiment? Americans hate the French. We become very anti-French, and we also become very anti-foreigner, which means we become nativist. Remember, nativism is the belief that native-born Americans are superior to people who are immigrants, or people who are just coming over here to America. All right, so the next one that we're going to look at is naming the three parts of Hamilton's economic plan. And then what we're going to look at is the American system. And we have to look at what region likes or dislikes the plan. So Hamilton's economic plan, the first part is assuming state's debt. Now, when you assume the state's debts, remember, think back to the American Revolutionary War. The North is mainly where the war is actually fought. And every state or every colony had to defend itself. So the northern states, the former colonies, had a whole lot of debt. They had fought pretty much the American Revolutionary War the whole time. So the North loves assuming states' debt because that means that the federal government is going to pay off every individual state's debt. The South hated it. They don't fight a whole lot in the American Revolutionary War. The British only bring the war down here in the later years of the American Revolutionary War. So the South hated it because they had less debt and they had already paid it off. They had taxed their citizens and they feel like they're being penalized because the North doesn't know how to control their own finances. The second part of this plan is to create a national bank. Okay, so he wants to create a national bank to stabilize our currency. The North loves it because they feel like they're going to be able to get the loans from the bank. The South absolutely hates it because they don't need any money. They have the plantations, they have cotton, they have tobacco, they have enough money, so they could care less about getting a loan from a bank because they have cash in their own accounts. Taxes and tariffs is the third part. The North loves tariffs because a tariff is a tax on an imported good, and that's going to protect their factories. The South absolutely hates it because the South has to buy all their refined goods. The South has absolutely no factories. Like, all they've got is cotton, tobacco, They have plantations and they have slaves. They don't have any actual modern manufacturing equipment. So anytime they want a t-shirt, they actually have to buy that t-shirt, even though they're growing the cotton that the t-shirt's going to be made from. So that means that now they have to pay higher prices for goods. Because when a tariff is high, your American-made good at this time period is really expensive. But the tariff just increased the price of the foreign good. And so now you're going to buy the American-made good because now when you look at the shelf, it's 50 cents cheaper. And it used to not be that way. It used to be that the foreign good was the cheapest good. So when you look at this, when you look at the Hamilton's economic plan, you're in debt, you got to get money, and then you got to deposit your money somewhere. So remember, the government's in debt, and whenever the government's in debt, they create taxes. Whenever they collect your taxes, they put it in a bank, just like anybody else. The American system is created by Henry Clay, and Henry Clay is our great compromiser. So when Henry Clay creates this plan, he kind of takes Hamilton's economic plan, looks at it, and he fixes this plan similar to it. This is during a period or era of nationalism, the era of good feelings, okay? So the Second National Bank is going to be created with the American system. Again, it's because our economy is getting a little weak and he wants to stabilize it. The North likes it because they're going to get the loans for their factories and their manufacturing industries. The South hates it because they're not going to get loans to farmers. Like, that's just not how it's going to work. The second part of this plan is taxes and tariffs. The North absolutely loves the tariffs again because it protects their factories. The South hates it because now they're having to buy American-made goods, which previously were the highest goods, and now they're the cheaper good. And cheaper just means it might be 50 cents cheaper, whereas before the foreign good was like $5 cheaper, and of course you would buy that. The third part is the internal improvements. So internal just means within. So he's going to improve the infrastructure of the country, and that means roads, bridges, canals. So he builds the Cumberland roads, he builds the Erie Canal. Two important things for you to know. The North loves it because now they're going to be able to get their supplies up and down from the South. So the South's going to send their cotton to the factories in the North, and they like it because it's an easier, faster way of transporting goods. And anytime transportation is easier for people, that means that your cost is going to start dropping. Okay, so the next thing that we're looking at is the actual treaties of the Federalist era. Jay's treaty is done by John Jay, and he's going to create this treaty with Britain. The purpose of the treaty is that the British have been on the Great Lakes, and the Great Lakes is our border, and the United States owes a lot of pre-Revolutionary War debt. So we wanted to stop the aggression. So what we decided to do is the U.S. agrees to pay all pre-Revolutionary War debt. And Britain is supposed to remove their forts, that means their military bases, from the Great Lakes. Really the significance of it is nobody actually follows the treaty. Charles Pinckney goes ahead and he gets the Pinckney's Treaty signed. This is going to be between the United States and Spain. The topic of conversation is that Spain owns basically the Louisiana Territory, they own New Orleans, they own the Mississippi River, and America would like to get navigational rights to it. So the U.S. gets navigational rights, which means we can go up and down the river, and we're going to be able to deposit our goods at the port of New Orleans. The significance of this treaty is the fact that it's going to increase trade and it's going to increase commerce. So we're going to get more business interactions. The next treaty is the Treaty of Greenville. And this treaty, this is between the United States and the American Indians. The United States always gets exactly what they want from the American Indians, and the American Indians always lose. So this is just going to be one of those overall concepts, those continuing trends, okay? So the U.S. is going to get the Ohio River Valley land from the American Indians, and the significance is the U.S. is expanding. So Manifest Destiny, remember, is expansion, and it's expansion out west. So it's God telling the American people that we have to move west. And if God tells you you have to do it, you better do it, or else you're a huge sinner, right? At least this is what Americans will use as their excuse for everything that they do during Manifest Destiny. The Adams-Onis Treaty is going to be signed between the U.S. and Spain. And basically what happens is the U.S. is going to get Florida. We pay a little bit of money because it's Spanish Florida. We don't want Spain in our territory. And so Spain's already kind of crumbling. They're kind of becoming an empire that's no longer an empire, not a real power anymore. And so what happens is we expand. It's manifest destiny again. So when we do the Louisiana Purchase, when we do Adams-Honest Treaty, when we do these kind of treaties, we're doing them with foreign countries who actually own property within the North American zone, the North American continent. And part of it is manifest destiny. It's about expanding, but the other part is about self-defense. You do not want these big boys of Europe as your neighbors, because the big boys of Europe go to war all the time. And America's not stupid. We realize what could potentially happen if we allow them to continue being here. So briefly explain the Alien and Sedition Acts and the president. Alien is just a word for immigrant, and so what's going to happen is we're going to increase the number of years it takes to be a U.S. citizen, which means you're going to prolong how long it takes someone to vote, because if you're not a citizen, you don't get to vote in our country. The Sedition Act says that you cannot speak out against the government. The government at the time was led by John Adams, who's a Federalist president, and he is trying to stop all opposition to his government. His government is a Federalist government, and the people who are criticizing him are the Democrat Republicans, and so he silences his opponents with this one bill. So which political party supported the Alien and Sedition Acts and why? So when we look at this, obviously the party that's going to support it is going to be the Federalists, because that's the president, President John Adams. So the Federalist Party supports it because this is going to stop the criticism of their laws, their things that they're trying to get passed. Remember, President George Washington's not a Federalist, even though the state of North Carolina kind of puts him as a Federalist. It's because he always expands the federal government size. John Adams is a Federalist. He expands the size of the federal government all the time too. And the Democrat Republicans are criticizing him for everything that he's doing. And all the immigrants that are coming into the country and becoming U.S. citizens, they're joining the Democrat Republican Party. The newspapers in the country are owned by Democrat Republicans. And the newspapers kind of control what you get to hear and what you don't get to hear. So he silences all his opposition. Nullification, define the nullification theory. If you look at the root of this word, null, it means null and void, okay? So nullification means a state can strike out any federal law that they would like because they don't agree with it. So if I don't like a tax, I can just strike it out and I don't have to follow it and I don't have to pay it. Well, wouldn't that be convenient for every state? Okay. And imagine if this is actually something that states could do. You have 50 states within the United States. You would have 50 states making which rules they wanted to follow and which rules they didn't follow. It would be absolute chaos and anarchy. Our country wouldn't exist. So how do the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions relate to nullification? Virginia is a southern state. Kentucky is really a western state. But when you look at these two states, remember the West always sides with the South during this time period because the West is really small farmers. So these two southern leaning states, they don't like the Alien and Sedition Act, and so they write these resolutions. They're just documents that say we don't have to follow any federal law that we don't agree with. So we don't agree with the Alien and Sedition Act, so we're not going to arrest people. We're not going to actually enforce it. We're just going to strike it out. We're putting white out on that federal law, and we refuse to follow it. That's what they're saying. So the next question that you have is, what right did women actually hold during the Federalist period and white male landowners? Women can inherit land, and that's it, you know, and they can inherit land like if their husband's deceased, they'd be able to get the land. White male landowners could vote. So when you look at who actually could vote at the beginning of our nation's history, it's only the rich white landowners who could actually vote. Explaining the difference between strict and loose interpretation of the Constitution. Strict means if it's not written, it cannot be done. So if it's not in plain black and white, then you cannot do it. And these would be people who are Democrat Republicans. So this is Thomas Jefferson. He is a strict interpreter of the Constitution. A loose interpretation of the Constitution is where you can read in between the lines. If you can dream it, you can do it. They're dreamers. They believe in anything, okay, because they're Federalists. And they believe in that elasticity clause that necessary and proper clause. And remember, Alexander Hamilton is the guy who really believes that, and that's how he creates the bank. And this disagreement over strict versus loose is why the bank is such an issue.